DHG here. I'm doing a review of a game that I didn't originally plan to do a review for, but played through it. Might as well do a review. Okay, now this is Sunset Overdrive. This game originally came out on the Xbox One. I played it on PC because I never had an Xbox One. I had no reason to get one. Anything that was on Xbox One, I could play on PC except for Halo Guardians, and I heard that wasn't good, so why get one? Alright, I'm going to start with the first things first in my usual list of things I review. The game's graphics. As you can see, they're fairly good. Now I think this was recorded in 1080p, but I played the game in 4K and it looked really good. There were some things that stood out more than others, like the lighting looked good, the view distance and all that. It was pretty impressive for a game that came out early Xbox One. The only thing that I really noticed that bothered me was back when I was playing on some of my older video cards, since I started and stopped this game numerous times for numerous reasons. I was having a bunch of computer problems, and every time I go to verify the game files or repair them, it would just delete my save data. So I actually managed to get from start to finish this time, and I beat it, so I can do my review finally. But on some of my older video cards, like I started playing it on a GeForce 970, and then I played it on a 580 RX, then a 1080, and now finally with the graphics card I have now, the 6700 XT. But on some of the older video cards, there were some really funky slowdown problems, like when you were traversing. You see what I'm doing there, traversing items. That's one of the major gameplay items within this game. You traverse things, especially the telephone wires in the game, and when I would turn the camera, I would get some really strange slowdown. I don't know what the effect of this was, but I didn't notice it on this video card, and I don't think I noticed it with my 1080 GTX either. But overall, the graphics of the game are good. It doesn't look like they did anything too overwrought, and they don't use temporal anti-aliasing, which I hate TAA. I think that was one of the worst anti-aliasing methods out there for numerous reasons. I know developers like it. I don't know why. Well, I'll move on to the next thing. Controls. Overall, the controls work pretty well. It takes a little getting used to, though, because with as fast-paced as the gameplay is, you see how you traverse wires and stuff here. Get to a part where there's a lot of action. Here I'm just bouncing around on cars, but you're constantly pressing things, whether it be to jump or to grind, and all this is mapped to different face buttons. There's not really many dual-purpose buttons like you see in Rockstar games. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you get used to it, it can come pretty second nature to you, but it's every now and then the traversal with pressing X to get up on wires and grind them and go underneath and go on top. It's kind of a bit of a pain, and if you see this glowing green trail, I'm going to get to that later, but that's a big thing. Overall, the controls are pretty good. The auto aim is generous enough since you're always jumping and bouncing, or as you've seen back here, you're always grinding around. So obviously when using a gamepad, it can be very hard to keep track of your movement and aim properly. If you're using a mouse, this probably won't be an issue. But the auto aim is generous enough, and it's not so forceful and magnetic that it really draws the cursor away from where the action is. It works just fine. So the controls are pretty good. Gameplay. Okay, the entire game revolves around bouncing on items. It's pretty much like the floor is lava concept. I don't know if that's what it was intended to be, but that's the first thing it made me think of. And it makes for some pretty fun gameplay, albeit though it can get annoying if you just want to do like typical shooter style where you're staying on your own 2 feet and you're just running around shooting things. That can be a bit annoying, but here comes that green trail. Oh, I just fast traveled. I loved how they pulled this off. She just gets drunk and passes out and wakes up somewhere else. Fast travel mechanic was pretty cool. But that green trail that you see following me, once you acquire that, you can play this like a normal first or third person shooter. You don't have to bounce around on stuff. I mean, it helps because it gives you style bonuses. But you could just run and gun if you wanted to while using that, whatever ability that green trail comes from. I can't remember what it's called. I ended up finishing recording this game months before I did this video, and I didn't record that much. I should have, but should have, could have, would have. So the gameplay is it's very parkour heavy. It's a third-person shooter, and it works out pretty well. It's not really anything I've seen any other type of developer do as of yet. This is pretty much like just the lone tree in the woods for game types like this. Some could compare it to Dying Light. I can't, but if this looks like an interesting game to you, then I recommend you play it. You can play it on Xbox Games Pass, either on PC or on Xbox, and it's fun. The sound. Oh, that part of the video didn't turn out too well. I need to get a better video editor. But the sound, as you can hear, there's constantly punk rock in the background, stuff like that, to try to keep it goes with the flow of the game. If you could say games have their own attitude about them, then this fits the attitude of the game. It's very kind of like careless, very punk rock attitude, and it works pretty well. I mean, it's not like some of the old World War II shooters that I played, and I played a lot of World War II shooters. I love them. Some of them would throw in like death metal, and it just felt weird. But no, this perfectly captures the tone of the game sound-wise. When it comes to the sound of the guns and all that, they can sound a little quiet. But I imagine that was by design, just because they didn't want the sound of the guns to override the sound of all the other elements of gameplay. But it does justice enough so that some of the earlier Halo games I had a problem with just because the guns sounded very crappy and very wimpy. This isn't the case here. I mean, they're just audible enough so that you can hear them, and they sound well. The sounds are diverse enough so it doesn't sound like, what's the one game I'm thinking of? I haven't reviewed it yet, but Prey from, I think, 2007 on the Xbox 360. I thought all the guns sounded and pretty much acted the same, or at least that's what I remember. That's not the case here. There's enough individuality with each of the different weapons, and you get a ton of them. I think you get maybe 24 or more different types of weapons you can use. I mean, to unlock them all, it's going to take a lot of grinding, but they all sound different, they all sound good. And it's very satisfying to use them all, especially once you see the different effects that they cause. So the sound is good, the music, I already touched on that, but the music fits the tone of the game perfectly, as I said. There's not really anything that feels that out of place here. Some of the songs can get pretty annoying, but if you don't like that, then just turn off the music. It's that simple. Story. Story was your typical, and I used to be kind of against this kind of thing until 2020 hit and we saw how much the corporations just loved our rights. But the story is, big corporation has malevolent design, and they do something out there that pretty much they know is going to have bad consequences on the people that are consuming their product, but you know, they don't care because money. And if you know that strikes some sort of a tone with you, then yeah, we've seen things like that recently with the COVID vax. Horribly, horribly filled with side effects, but yet they're doing it because money. I think there's more of a religious aspect to that, but I could get into that some other time. But the story's pretty much bad corporations damaging the little man, which is prevalent among today's society, considering the Great Reset and all that was going on. If you don't know about the Great Reset, you need to learn about it very quickly. It's the perfect explanation for everything that's going on today, and they don't even hide it. Just like Hitler didn't hide Mein Kampf. or what he wanted to do. He wrote a book about it. Well, you got Klaus Schwab and all the other great resetters saying what they're going to do. History repeats itself. This is why tearing down statues is not a good idea. You need to learn. But that's pretty much the story. I would like to see, I mean, oftentimes you'll hear gamers talking about, just keep the politics out of games, but that Pandora's box has already opened. Developers are going to be doing it. What I would like to see is they stop doing this. Well, I forgot the name of the game for the second. I absolutely hated it. The Last of Us 2. Instead of doing this stupid virtue signaling bullshit that Neil Druckmann did in that game, they should actually get on the topics of, like, big pharmaceutical companies. Resident Evil kind of did this, but not so directly. Big pharmaceutical companies, big tech companies, the military-industrial complex, doing all this stuff against the average person for money. I would like to see some developers capture those ideas and actually put some balls about it, but I imagine that it won't get out because of the publishers. A lot of these publishers, the more I see, Ubisoft, EA, Epic Games, they're all tied with China. China is a major part of the Great Reset, so they don't want any of the real information getting out there. But the story about the major corporations doing bad things to people is completely applicable today. This was back in 2016 when even I myself didn't know about it that much, but there were signs. And I'm totally for it. I just wish that they would tackle some of the bigger demons like big tech and big pharma. So the story was pretty good overall. There was a lot of humorous moments in the game, and I love that. Having serious games, it depends on what the subject matter is. If it's like a World War II shooter or something, I don't see humor as being appropriate because there's nothing funny about the pain and suffering that was caused then. But this wasn't about that. And Insomniac games have always had their own flair of humor about them. Not so much the Resistance series, but with Ratchet and Clank's just filled with humor. Ratchet and Clank's one of my favorite series, period. It's so good. But that's pretty much it. Humor, you got a good story, is kind of avant-garde as it may be. It was good, it was serviceable, and it moves the gameplay forward. Interesting enough, I mean, it wasn't a throwaway story like some of these games have, where they just throw something in there, and it doesn't really mean anything. You just want to get in there and explore. This story is somewhat interesting. Stability and bugs. Well, other than the issues with the graphics card, I didn't have any crashes. And that's probably the big thing, because, if you get a crash, and that crash happens to occur when you're auto-saving, damage those game files. That happened to me with Fallout New Vegas. Lost about 10 hours of data on that game. Taught me the value of manual saving. But that's not the issue here. I haven't had any of that happen. Some of the frame rate issues, I didn't have any when I played through this time. But I remember there was something with, I think it was the depth of field in this game that was causing a lot of problems for people with certain graphics cards. That could be easily fixed there. There were a couple other issues, but there's no, hardcore stability issues with this game that I've seen. If there was one, it could be fixed. That's from what I've seen my own experience. So it's a fairly stable game. And I would say it's more stable than most. In my opinions. I don't know where... I know this Insomniac releases a period of time when they were pissed off at Sony, and rightfully so. I don't know what kind of a deal they had with them, but Sony went scorched earth on Insomniac properties. At that point in time, it was the beginning of the PS4, Xbox One era, and Sony and Insomniac had like an exclusivity deal since PS2, PS3. In the end of the PS3 years, Insomniac released a game called Fuse, which was kind of like a third-person... Yeah, it was a third-person. I couldn't remember if it was first or third. It was a third-person co-op shooter, since that was what everyone was making at the time, and it wasn't that good. But what pissed Sony off was it was multi-platform. It was also on the Xbox. And so, in response, Sony decided to take all the Resistance servers, Resistance 1, Resistance 2, which Resistance 2 still had a good bit of people playing it, and I still love playing it, and Resistance 3, and took them offline. Now keep in mind that this happened right after, or shortly after, Sony decided to lump up all the Resistance games and sell it as a trilogy. And so people just buying that trilogy at like Best Buy, since, you know, the Great Reset didn't start yet, people were still buying a lot of things in stores. COVID, you know. But people would just go to the store and they would get this trilogy. They come home, start playing it, and they see that the multiplayer servers were offline. A big part of Resistance 2 and Resistance 3 was online. Resistance 1, not a lot of people were still playing that, but Resistance 2 was very online heavy. In fact, that was its strongest suit. So you find out that Sony shuts the servers down. I don't believe they've ever issued an apology about that. It was kind of just to spite Insomniac. So Insomniac came out with this game for Microsoft. I understand that they might be making a sequel, but I haven't looked that far into it. But this, as it was a pretty fun one-off. It's got all the Insomniac traits to it, like the different kinds of weapons and all that stuff, and all the crazy stuff that they do, since that was in Resistance to a lesser degree. It's in all Ratchet and Clank games, and it was present here. So I wouldn't mind seeing a sequel to this come out if there could be one, but considering how many different things Insomniac's working on, they're doing the Spider-Man stuff now, they're still making Ratchet and Clank games, and as current gaming trends are going, developers are going from making a lot of games in any specific generation. You know, like PS2, Rockstar made, I think, 24 games. PS4 era, they made. So the trend's going towards, they say more quality, but I'm not buying that argument. I don't know what the current state of it is or why this is happening, but we're getting less and less and less good games from good developers. Whereas before in the PS2, PS3 era, we would see a ton of them. Now, exclude Call of Duty, I think most of them are crap. And they come out on a yearly basis. But we used to see a ton of Rockstar games. Bethesda games came out with a few, especially during the 360 era. But now you see that they might drop like one per generation. I don't know if that's because of rising costs, because the costs of everything are rising. Why wouldn't labor rise too? But I think there's got to be some sort of a happy medium here, and that this game could possibly see a sequel, because I don't think most gamers are looking for, everyone keeps thinking bigger and bigger and bigger. Gotta make it bigger, bigger, bigger. Look at Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I've played that, I beat it. The map is so big, and I probably saw maybe 15% of it. In each different place you go to, it's just like looking at the same damn thing over and over again. So stop using big as a barometer for ambition with the game. You could do a lot of things in a smaller space, and Fallout 4 proved that. I would like to see some of the developers scale back their ambitions a little bit, stop focusing on making games that are going to take like 300 hours to complete, because that's just absurd. I would rather see a game dropped every 2 years, or every 3 years more appropriately, from a developer like, say, Bethesda or Rockstar, than have them make one game every 7 years. That's just my opinion. I think that's where it should go. But pertaining to Sunset Overdrive, we could see a sequel to this, and I hope they do, because this was a fun experience once I got it up and running properly. That was my computer's fault, not this game's. And overall, I would rate this game as good. There's some things I could have done to make it a little better, like they could have made the controls a little more fluent, easier to do, swap some of the functions around from maybe X to the left button. But overall, it was fun enough to keep you engaged from beginning to end, and exploring the city was actually a lot of fun. Some of the side activities weren't that good, but it was a good game overall. And so there you have it. Sunset Overdrive. Good.